Kraemer, welcome this morning and have a seat. And sorry we're running a few minutes late. I apologize. Be careful.
Slippery chair today.
Whenever you feel comfortable, why don't you start your opening remarks?
Thank you. Thank you all for allowing me to speak with you today. I hope to answer a few questions. First, why the Court of Appeals? Why now? And hopefully, why me? I'm not a native Iowan. I was raised in Hines, Oregon, and the towns of Burns and Hines are close together. They're about 4,300 people. In a county the size of Massachusetts, so it's very rural. And that's, I think, very similar to a lot of Iowa in that the rural interests want to be protected and want to be considered. Throughout my career, I've tried to take advantage of opportunities. The first one was taking my undergraduate education in Richmond, Virginia, which was quite a ways from Oregon, but it was close to some extended family. So it was a way to explore the country a little bit and still have the protection of family nearby. I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, a joint degree program in law and psychology at Villanova and Hahnemann. So at the time, this was the only joint JD PhD program to offer a clinical PhD, as opposed to a research or a master's level psychology degree. While in Philadelphia, I had a summer internship with the FBI, which led to the opportunity to do my dissertation research for the FBI using their data. At the time, this was one of the first studies on serial homicide at a national level using law enforcement data. Previous research had used primarily what was available from the press, so we had a more fulsome data set, and the FBI still uses this data today in their work. So it was nice to be able to contribute in that way. After internship, I was internship in Houston, Texas at the Baylor College of Medicine. I clerked for the Fourth Circuit Office of Staff Counsel, and they did all of the criminal and habeas work for the Fourth Circuit. Then I moved to Iowa with my fiance, John, who is now my husband, and began work for the Honorable George Fagg of the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Fagg impressed upon me and the other clerks the importance of writing concisely and briefly. Opinions were drafted so that the reader could easily understand what was being communicated. And I try to write continually now in a way that's accessible and persuasive, and to be brief where possible. I followed my work with Judge Fagg as an associate at Whitfield and Eddy for 4 years. Whitfield is unique in that associates are not hired into a practice area, so I had the opportunity to work with a lot of great lawyers there. I would have never known that I enjoyed products liability work were not for this flexible approach. I had the opportunity to work on the Teflon multi-district litigation, and even though I was just an associate at the time, I picked up some tips that I was able to take with me and use on other cases. I had the opportunity to train under some excellent lawyers and work in insurance defense, employment. I had some criminal and family law experience. And the firm is primarily defense-oriented, but I did do some plaintiff's work. I joined the Iowa Attorney General's office more than 12 years ago. Most of my practice has been in mental health law. I do the civil commitment appeals, so I have an appellate docket that I've done for about 10 years. I've done 50 or so constitutional torts, and those cases are unique to government, and they involve preparing the case like a normal tort. You marshal the documents and prepare the witnesses, but there's a constitutional overlay to the analysis. So I've had First Amendment cases, 14th Amendment cases, 8th Amendment cases. Currently I have a few Godfrey cases under the new Iowa constitutional tort that has recently been recognized as distinct by the Iowa Supreme Court. My practice has been primarily civil. About the closest I've gotten to prosecutorial work are revocations of conditional release for people who are sexually violent predators and placed in less restrictive placements. And so they look a lot like a parole revocation. It's a little more prosecutorial, but it's still civil because the commitment is civil in nature. As part of my docket, I've handled petitions for relief of disabilities, which are people who have been involuntarily hospitalized, lose their firearm rights as an artifact of federal law. And there's now a process where they can get those rights back. And that and the CUSO cases has allowed me to practice throughout the state of Iowa. So I've been in a number of counties throughout the state of Iowa and been able to appear before a great number of Iowa's fabulous judges. I've handled a number of administrative hearings, from child abuse registry appeals to legal settlement, which is no longer a thing, but at the time it was a way to decide what government was responsible for paying which bills, and other quirks of government practice which assure the citizens have a right of redress if they disagree with a government decision. In 2016, I was granted a promotion and serve as the division director for DHS for the Iowa Attorney General's office. It's given me the opportunity to supervise, which was new for me, and it's been fairly easy because the Attorney General hires really great people, but it's a new skill set. It also expanded my docket of responsibilities into areas in which DHS needs representation. I've done more child welfare work and work in the Medicaid area. In addition to appearing in courts throughout Iowa, I've argued before both Iowa federal courts in the Northern and Southern District, in the 8th Circuit, the court that I initially served as a clerk, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago most recently. I have had one opinion issue since completing the application, so I have 160 appellate opinions in Westlaw to my name. I've completed 2 more briefs and have 2 more on my desk that need to be written. For community involvement, it's varied over the years. Currently, I'm on the COLI. It's a national board, the Committee of Legal Issues for the American Psychological Association. They vet the amicus briefs. The APA has a very active amicus program. And then other business that comes before that board. Previously, I taught at Drake for about 10 years. I've been involved with my church and the local tree board. I volunteered for the Animal Rescue League before my children were born, and now my oldest is about old enough that we can start co-volunteering there, which will be really fun. Why the Court of Appeals? Because much of the work of the Court of Appeals comes from the Attorney General's office, and more specifically from the DHS division of the Attorney General's office. 21% of the Court of Appeals docket in 2017 were juvenile cases, all of which come from the DHS division, and of which 40 were mine from that year. Additionally, judicial review and mental health appeals come from the DHS division of the Attorney General's office, so serving on the Court of Appeals would be serving on the other side of a familiar equation. It's work that I'm accustomed to doing. I did not apply for the Supreme Court openings because I haven't served as a judge before, but I thought that this was a good opportunity and a good fit with my practice and my skill set. And given that there are 2 openings now, it was a good time to apply. So that is a partial answer to the second question, why now? Because I think there's an opportunity. And the rest of that answer is because I feel like I'm ready. I've had a number of experiences, from big cases to smaller cases, administrative, federal, district, and appellate experiences. And I've learned from each one, and I'm ready to put that experience to work for Iowans on the bench. And the final answer, why me? I think this variety of experiences and the additional perspective of my psychology training would be of benefit to the court. And I hope that my experience and education give you all sufficient reason to support my application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll begin the questioning, excuse me, with Ms. Pearson.
Good morning, and thank you for being here and your application. You have an interesting combination with your degrees, and you just kind of answered this question as that it would be a benefit as well with your psychology degree. But maybe you could expand upon that as to how you think that would, it's benefited your career up to now and would be an added value and benefit to enhance the Court of Appeals.
Sure. Well, obviously, it's another subject matter source of expertise. So I am familiar with reading scientific research and understanding statistics. I'm familiar with understanding psychology, and obviously those issues come up in family law quite often, and obviously in the DHS cases and mental health cases. So I think that subject matter expertise would be a benefit to the court.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowden?
Yes, thank you. In your practice, I think you've indicated before, mental health has played an important part of the litigants' roles. What role do you see, or do you feel your background in understanding mental health would help you?
Well, there are a number of cases where people become justice involved because of mental health issues, so I think that additional frame of reference is helpful. And then, of course, there are cases where it's really not an issue at all, but I do think that mental health can come into play in a lot of criminal matters and obviously in the civil matters that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Mr. Berger?
No questions, sir.
Mr. Diaz?
No questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Law?
No questions.
Mr. Bevel?
No questions.
Mr. Sukup?
No question.
Ms. Sinclair?
No questions.
Ms. Stiekma?
Ms. Kraemer, are you concerned about the probability of conflicts if you were chosen to be on the Court of Appeals, and how would you handle those?
Well, any case that I was involved in while I was at the department obviously would be a conflict, and because there's an expedited docket for all of the work that DHS does, I think that time frame would run out pretty quickly. The expedited docket is, we have 15 days to respond, and those cases are heard and decided on an expeditious manner. So there would be a conflict initially, but I think that would be fairly time limited.
Thank you.
Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Your Honor. You're a very impressive candidate, and obviously you carry a big workload in your current position, and at the time you've been in private practice prior to that. Tell me a little bit about the metrics on that. I mean, whether you can tell me when you go to work and come back home in private practice, billing hours, just so we can get a handle on your readiness to handle the Court of Appeals workload.
Sure. Well, my impression is that the Attorney General's office is also underfunded and overworked, so I feel like it's going to be fairly equivalent. My practice, in private practice, we did have billing hour requirements. It was 150, and I met that every month and was usually in the 180 range. And then if you add on sort of the non-billable work-related things, it would be closer to 200. We don't have to bill anymore at the AG's office, which is fabulous. But I maintain that sort of workload. I have children now, so I tend to go home at a normal hour and then pick up my computer again when they're in bed. And so I pretty typically work several evenings a week and at least a few hours most weekends, and sometimes a full day or more, depending on what's going on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Bloom?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Conover?
No questions.
Mr. Robert? Ms. O'Brien?
Could you please explain what vicarious trauma and attorney self-care as an ethical issue was one of your presentations?
It is, and we're actually giving it again soon. So vicarious trauma is when you don't experience the trauma personally, but it wears on you, basically bearing witness to the trauma of others. And I think this is very relevant not only to attorneys, but judges who work in the child abuse area. It could be in family law, even in criminal law, about the personal toll that it takes when you are with people who abuse and are abused. And so it's about recognizing that, recognizing the symptoms, some coping strategies, and talking about that in terms of the Iowa ethical rules, where you are supposed to give objective, dispassionate advice. And at a point in time, the burden can become a point where I think everybody needs to be aware that it can take a personal toll. And so that's the basics of the presentation. That we have some, not a lot of research, but some research that has been done on trauma and judges and attorneys. And like one study said 63% of people who work in the criminal realm, judges and attorneys, have experienced some sort of personal trauma as vicariously because of their cases.
Mr. Horbach?
Thank you, Justice. By your definition, I may be a cause for vicarious. My question is, and I have had the opportunity to work with the AG's office over the last 14 years, and my question is, which experience allowed you to be more qualified for this position? You being as a hands-on frontline AG attorney, or the supervisor who's overseeing the cases as they move forward to the Court of Appeals?
That's a good question. Well, I've done a lot of writing myself, so I think I've been hands-on more than I've been a supervisor, so I would probably think the former of the two.
The reason why I ask that is I think there's a strong parallel between what the Court of Appeals does for cases it hears and you as a supervisor overseeing the cases as they flow over here to the court system. And by the way, your answer is appropriate. I just thought that there was a parallel.
Sure. Well, there definitely is a role. We try to take up cases and keep in mind sort of the overall state of the law, and that always factors in, like if we get a reversal, which are not too common, but are we gonna seek further review? And those considerations are definitely foremost in the mind as, as the supervisor, like how will this advance the law? Is this something that will be a problem in more than just this particular case? And so I definitely think that's a consideration.
Thank you for your answer.
Mr. Gray?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Kraemer, in your opening remarks, you referred to being before several fabulous judges.
Yes.
What are the characteristics that make up a fabulous judge?
I think you have to be well prepared. I think you have to be smart. I prefer a judge with an open mind and I think a kind heart. It's definitely easier to practice in front of a judge who is listening and really concerned with the litigants before them, in addition to resolving the dispute. When people are in court, it's usually not their best day, right? Unless you're there for a wedding or an adoption, there's a conflict and there's a reason, there's a problem that needs to be solved. And so I think that compassion is a good focal point for a judge as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. In your presentation, you used the acronym CUSO,
Yeah, sorry.
and I didn't know what that was till I got here. Can you explain to the commissioners what that is and why that's very important work?
Sure. CUSO, it stands for the Civil Commitment Unit for Sexual Offenders. And so there are certain people who have already served their criminal sentence, but they are evaluated and determined by a clinician and then by a judge or a jury to be people who are likely to sexually offend in the future. So they are determined to be sexually violent predators. And we have a treatment program for them up in Cherokee where they learn to mitigate their sexually dangerous propensities. And it is a civil program, it is a civil commitment program, but these are fairly dangerous people. So those are important issues. They've brought a number of issues of first impression across my desk, which is kind of fun to do.
Yeah, I know about those.
Yes, you do have those. And so it's also interesting legally because a lot of the issues look criminal, but it has to be civil in nature, and so there are different standards that are applied to the individuals in their confinement.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. We have a few more minutes. Does anybody have any follow-up questions? Seeing none, we really appreciate you coming here, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.